Your Humanities Half-hour is brought to you by the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.
Hapaday, Tiro, and welcome to your Humanities Half-hour. I'm Catherine Perry, and today we're talking science. I just love looking for ways to tie local science into local humanities, and we have a couple of those topics today. Our first guest is Jill Liske-Clark. She's the Wildlife Supervisor of CNMI Fish and Wildlife, and she's talking about something I think many of our listeners will find interesting, a path toward delisting the Mariana fruit bat, also known as Fanihi. Jill, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Catherine. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, I understand this presentation was actually delivered by the Rota Field Office Supervisor, Joshua Guilbert.
Yes, that's right. He is our bat biologist based on Rota, and he presented on this topic at the Marianas Terrestrial Conservation Conference that was held on Saipan here a week or two ago.
Well, thank you to Joshua and the team that put this together and for tapping you to do the interview since he's in Rota, and thanks for your time today. Tell us, what is the status of the Fanihi population in the Marianas?
Great. Well, you know what? On some islands, it's doing quite well. On other islands, not so much. So in the northern islands, those populations, they don't experience a lot of threats. They're relatively secure. Here in the southern islands, that being from Guam all the way up to Saipan, the Rota population is doing reasonably well, but those other four southern islands, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, not so good.
Now, the Fanihi is actually endangered on one list and threatened on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service list. What do those designations mean, and how did we get there?
Okay. Well, the two lists you're referring to, the endangered list, that's the IUCN, or International Union for the Conservation of Nature. That list has no regulatory meaning. It's just really to alert the public to that perhaps we should be concerned about this species. The one that really has a hammer associated with it, so to speak, is that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service designation, and it is locally designated as a threatened species. And when a species is listed by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, it comes with lots of restrictions about things you can't and can't do. You're not allowed to what's called take that species, which take has a broad meaning. It doesn't just mean kill it. It means harm, harass, pursue, etc. Really anything you do to bother that species could be considered take.
So when you say some of the populations are doing okay and some are threatened, can you share some of the numbers with us and some of the trends maybe that we've seen from either before it became threatened and since then?
Sure. Well, in our most recent range-wide count, unfortunately it's almost 10 years old right now, but across all of the Marianas from Guam all the way up to Euracus, we estimated about 5,500 bats across the entire range. And of those, we have a solid population of over 2,000 on Rota. That is the largest population in the Marianas. And that population has been increasing over the last 5 to 10 years. Of course, Typhoon Mangkhut didn't help. That has knocked the numbers back down. But this is a species, much like all of our local species, that are adapted to typhoons. And typically the populations can rebound fairly quickly. So it's coming back now. In the other southern islands, Saipan and Tinian and Guam, we don't even really talk so much about having a bat population. We have random sightings of bats, but we don't have anything that we would call a sustainable breeding population on these islands. And these are the islands that are really the challenge for us, the barrier to delisting of that species.
I was interesting to read in the presentation that, and correct me if I'm wrong, bats produce only one offspring a year.
That is correct. Yes. So if, for example, a typhoon or a hunter or power lines, these are ways that bats are killed. If you take out one female from a population, this female, she can live 12 to 15 years, produce 12 or so pups in her lifetime. So a loss of one female bat from a population genuinely has significant ramifications.
What are the current threats, the biggest threats, prohibiting the colonies in these southern islands from becoming, as you said, sustainable?
Mm-hmm. Well, we have to go a lot based on stories we hear from within the community. But right now we feel that illegal hunting is the primary threat that is keeping the populations down on Guam and Saipan and Tinian. And, I just want to be clear with the listeners that the Division of Fish and Wildlife, our goal is to get this species delisted because we want local people to be able to once again harvest this species and enjoy it as their ancestors have for generations. But unfortunately, right now, that is not authorized under federal or local law.
So it really sounds like if a few irresponsible illegal hunters continue their practice, that is one of the major factors that's preventing the population in general being able to enjoy this as a delisted species.
That's correct. And I tell you what, I would stake my career on this statement that if I could wave my magic wand and stop all hunting for a period of 5 to 10 years, that 10 years from now we would be in a position where we could be petitioning the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to delist that species. I just need a magic wand, that's all.
Well, it's really nice to hear what actually is the desire and the goal of Fish and Wildlife, because I think a lot of times when these creatures get on the endangered or threatened species list, it's like forever we're thinking we were going to have to deal with this. But it's nice to know that, there is a means that you've identified to possibly delist the Fanihi if we as a community can agree to take that path collectively.
Well, I tell you, there are actions being taken, not just related to hunting, but there are other things that the conservation agencies can and are doing. For example, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services is launching a project on Agiguan, Goat Island, to convert some significant monocultures of this invasive shrub, lantana, into native forest. We're talking, a couple hundred acres over time of area that right now is not producing food for Fanihi, but when it's converted to native forest, will. And from that, we would expect the population on Agiguan to grow. Fantastic. Our agency, our local agency, we are launching a concerted effort to really push to increase the numbers on Saipan. Because again, Rota's fine. We've got Rota, but we need more southern islands with bigger populations. So here on Saipan, our agency is going to be starting regular monitoring so we can get a better handle on how many bats are actually on Saipan right now and what areas they're using. And through that means we think we can plan more actions on Saipan going forward.
I was talking to the station manager here at Power 99, James Nelson, before our chat, just to get some cultural context. If he has any memories growing up. He actually grew up in Guam, and he does remember his mom preparing fruit bat soup, which he actually said he didn't really like. But another thing he remembered is that in those days, when his father and his uncles were hunting or fishing, they were only hunting or fishing enough for that day. They didn't have deep freezers then. They weren't hunting to sell. They were just hunting or fishing what the family needed for that period. And that's just a great testament as to cultural conservation practices that are in our history that we should be implementing, even if the federal government doesn't say that we have to. But as our culture, conservation in this method would also be beneficial to the recovery of the species.
Absolutely. And it's a little, it's funny because sometimes endangered species listings are helpful, and in some ways they can backfire. And the way that this listing has changed things is Fanihi is now a black market item. It's a black market commodity that people can't use those traditional practices. And so instead you have, again, a few bad actors that are harvesting them, putting them in the freezer and selling them for, we have heard anywhere from $25 a bat up to over $100 a bat is what we've heard. In fact, there was a freezer on Rota in which 16 frozen bats were found in the last year. And
that was in the news.
Yes, that was in the news, and I'm not sure what the status of that investigation is, but doesn't look good for that person.
Do you know what is the penalty for taking a threatened species?
It can vary, and I can't remember if there's a possibility of jail time or not, but I know that there are hefty fines associated with it. And again, in this Rota situation, that's 16 bats, so that is 16 counts against a person. So if it's a fine of, say, $5,000 a bat, that's a lot of money. So the penalties can be significant for sure.
Well, I really want to thank you for giving us insight into this presentation. What can we as a community do to help delist the Fanihi? And also, where can people see this presentation or get more information?
Sure. Well, I'll start with the second question first, which is this presentation is going to be uploaded along with all the other presentations from the Marianas Terrestrial Conservation Conference on that website, which is marianasterrestrialconservation.org. It's not up there yet, but you give us another week or two and we'll get it up there. They're also welcome to call or stop by the Saipan or Rota DFW offices at any time, and we'd be happy to answer questions and share more information face-to-face, certainly. Let's see, the first question was, what can people do? So in addition to just respecting the law, I understand that it's a sacrifice, and I think what it really is a community sacrifice that I'm not asking for it for me. I'm saying that if this is something the community wants, the community is going to have to sacrifice together for everyone's benefit. In addition to that, I talked about how we are upping our activities on Saipan. Well, we are going to have a first ever Saipan island-wide Fanihi count. The date hasn't been set yet, but I'm thinking sometime next May or June, around then. And that's going to be a citizen science volunteer event where we need help from the community. The idea is that you scatter observers across lots of vantage points, someone up on Mount Tapachow, someone up by the radar tower, etc., all at the same time at dawn, and you watch for bat activity. And if you have enough observers in those vantage points, then we can get an accurate count of how many bats we have on Saipan. So I would love to have folks calling the Saipan or Rota offices saying that they would like to participate in that. In addition, on Rota, the Rota office is going to be conducting a survey. And this is a survey that was last completed 10, 15 years ago about local people's attitudes toward Fanihi. And this is a survey with no judgment. Do you hunt them? Fine. Do you eat them? Fine. Or do you just enjoy seeing them and knowing they're in the forest? That's fine too. We just want to understand better if local attitudes are changing, what they are, how they might be changing. And so we will be conducting anonymous interviews over the next year. And so if you're from Rota, you can contact the Rota DFW office to volunteer to be interviewed. Lastly, and this is not, I've mentioned what folks on Rota and Saipan can do. I don't want to leave Tinian out. This is true for Saipan and Tinian. We really want to get a better handle on how many bats are seen on these islands. So on those two islands specifically, Saipan or Tinian, we would love for the public to report any sighting of a Fanihi to our Saipan DFW office. How many did you see? Where did you see them? When did you see them? That's it. Just call our office and say, hey, I want to report a Fanihi sighting on Tinian or Saipan, and we want to know about it.
Wow, so they're really that sparse that you want every sighting to be reported.
That's exactly right. And I'll say, since we've had these typhoons, mainly Typhoon Mangkhut on Rota just, over a year ago, we had a lot more Fanihi sightings from Saipan and Tinian, as in, life wasn't so good on Rota. Those bats picked up and went somewhere else.
They can do that. They can fly that far.
They can fly that far.
Wow.
And it's a little easier for a bat than it is for a person, isn't it?
Yeah.
So we don't get to pick up and flee typhoons so easily, but they do. And so we have been seeing more on Saipan and Tinian, and what we want to know is, are they or have they gone back to Rota, or may they set up a new home on these islands, provided that they are safe and protected?
Well, thank you so much for your time today and your information. Anything else you'd like to add before we go?
Just that it has been a pleasure to be here, and a pleasure for me to work for the people of the CNMI, and this is something that we want for everyone. We want everyone to be able to enjoy Fanihi again someday, at least the ones that like it and want it.
I got to hold one time when they were at the Saipan Zoo. I'd rather cuddle them. They're rather cute.
They are quite cute. I will give you that. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, too. Our guest today has been Jill Liske-Clark, Wildlife Supervisor of the CNMI Division of Fish and Wildlife, talking about a path toward delisting the Mariana fruit bat, Fanihi, as presented by Joshua Guilbert at the recent Marianas Terrestrial Conservation Conference. We'll be back with more in the second half of our show.
Did you know that you can donate up to $5,000 to the Humanities Council through the CNMI Education Tax Credit Program? Donations from individuals and corporations qualify and can be used to offset your local wage and salary tax, BGRT, and earnings tax. Call our office at 235-4785 to see how you can support humanities programs in our community and obtain a tax credit for your donation. Sizu'us ma'asi, olomai, and thank you.
Welcome back to your Humanities Half-hour. Here in the second half of the show, we're talking about mapping, specifically navigational mapping and habitat mapping here in the Marianas. And here to talk to us more about an upcoming project in the summer of 2020 are Evan Howell. He's the Deputy Director of the NOAA Pacific Islands Fishery Science Center, and also Nori Shoji. She is the Director for the Science Operations of the Center. Welcome to the Marianas, guys.
Thank you.
Those are pretty long titles. Did I get them right?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So I understand that what's coming up next summer is something of a collaboration between several agencies. It's going to provide some really valuable information to the people of the Marianas, especially about what's happening in the Northern Islands, but not only the Northern Islands. What is this summer cruise expedition project all about?
we have a new ship coming out, the NOAA ship Rainier, which is primarily a hydrographic survey vessel, but they will also be supporting our center's triennial reef fish and reef health cruises. And so we're combining efforts. These are two projects that aren't historically done at the same time. And one of the benefits of having the Rainier come out is their ability to do high-resolution mapping, which will update all the nautical charts that all mariners rely on for safe navigation. But in addition, they'll be providing capacity to do habitat mapping, which is really important to resource managers and to research scientists at our center, where going to focus a large effort on Saipan from 0 to 100 fathoms of high-resolution mapping, where we're going to work with our local agency partners as well as other federal partners to come up with very detailed maps that will tell you whether there are corals, whether it's rocky, whether it's sandy, and all of this information is really critical to understanding the marine resources for the people of Saipan, but generally for the people that are interested in the environment for the Mariana Archipelago.
Now, has this type of habitat mapping been done for our islands before?
To a much smaller degree. I believe 2 years ago there was a project in Saipan Lagoon that was rolled out, which is basically the same product that we will have for the entirety of Saipan when we're done with this effort that's coming up. And it is a very detailed habitat map, where before it would be sort of these large shapes that say, well, we know corals are here, but this map, it's like all these little dots that say this is the kind of algae.
Like GPS oriented.
So
okay.
it's a much higher resolution, and it really is quite amazing. And it's actually available online, so I'll provide you the link to that. And that was actually done by our partners in the National Ocean Service. And the local NOAA office was part of that project. So this takes what they did, which is an amazing habitat map product, and expanding it for all of Saipan.
So the fact that you're partnering next year with the Rainier, is there certain equipment that they have that makes this more detailed map possible? Is that part of the benefit of this partnership?
Yes. So in addition to them being a mapping ship, this is what they do, coastal mapping is their bread and butter, they have a much more capacity than multi-beam, which collects a lot more information than the little units we've used in the past.
Give us an idea of what the information that's going to come from this might be used for or useful for.
So the habitat mappings, being able to understand what the habitat is can play into a lot of scientific projects, as well as even identify at base level areas people in the community may want to explore more, so in our local partners here. For us at the Science Center, understanding the habitat mapping can really help set the boundaries for where we expect specific fish stocks to be. And part of the work that we do is to go out and visually count the fish that we see in the environment, which helps us get to an understanding of how we would build an actual assessment of the entire fish stock of interest. So part of our job is to try to sustain the fisheries in many areas in the Western Pacific. And to do that, we need to understand where the fish are, and a lot of that is determined by the habitat. So this habitat map can help us determine where the boundaries are for this, what we call essential fish habitat, which is really the safe areas where the fish need to make more fish and stay healthy.
Now, you do this type of study in other parts of the Pacific, correct? Like Hawaii?
Yes.
Can you give us an example of how Hawaii used this information to make some decisions?
Sure. So like I said, if we're looking at counting how many fish there are, you and I might expect, well, if I have the entire Pacific and I do see the fish in one area, can I assume that the fish is everywhere? But if I know, for example, that particular fish needs, say, a coral reef environment, and I know where that coral reef environment were to stop, then I can really tell you, no, the fish is really only to be found in these specific areas. And so we either have to work with the community to protect this area or to understand how we might not fish too many fish out, or, be able to kind of manage that resource together a little bit better.
Are there any general trends you can share related to fish population or other marine life populations habitat that might be of interest to us, or particular to the Marianas?
Well, some of the things that we've been noticing a lot, and probably a lot of people in the community have seen, is that coral bleaching is always a concern. And so with the temperatures that we've seen, I think we've said it's now the warmest decade on record. A lot of that translates into ocean temperature, and we know that for corals, if there's too much sun, not enough wind, the temperature's too high for too long, what you'll see is that coral bleaching, which is actually when the corals turn white. They can recover. Some species recover faster than others, and a lot of what we're trying to study then is we can't control the temperature, but we might be able to understand more about why certain corals might bleach more than others, why certain corals might recover faster than others, and try to work with trying to get to restoration of the coral reefs. We all know that the coral reefs are crucial for the environment, both for the communities but for all the ecosystem animals. So trying to work together to figure out how we might get to an ability to restore or protect those coral resources is important. And these studies give us the information we need to help get there.
If this study is taking place in the summer, when do we anticipate this mapping would be available to the public?
There's always a process with making sure the information collected is clean and accurate. There are stages in which data can be delivered out. And the nautical charts are a process that has to meet international requirements. But I would say that it would be at least a year before new nautical charts would come up. For the habitat maps, it is an incredibly labor-intensive process that we're not likely to see all of the maps. We'll probably try and slowly release them so that we're not waiting until we have a final product that's staged. But we wouldn't expect to have maps out until probably just before the holidays in 2021. But
that is labor intensive.
Yes. But the data collected, once it's quality assured and quality controlled, that data actually becomes available within a couple months of the cruise collection itself. The other information that's being collected with our divers in the water, they actually intend to do interim updates after each leg that the ship completes. So there'll be information coming out within days of the ship pulling into port, updates so people are aware of, at least if they saw something that was unexpected, or if they, knock on wood, saw what they hoped to see, which is a healthy reef or a reef in recovery or lots of fish where they're supposed to be fish, things like that. So information will be staged, but within days. And even when the ship is out collecting, we try to do updates so people are aware of where the ship is and what they're doing and what they're seeing. So hopefully it's not a fire hose of information all at once, but we're releasing information all along the way. And then by the end of 2021, full products that are publicly available and are of value to all of our partners on the management side.
So you're going to be mapping from Guam to Mog. How can the community either follow your updates during the mapping or support your efforts?
So one of the things that's been great about this week is we've met with a lot of local partners to try to identify priorities for them, but also for us to understand how we can do a better job of communicating what we're doing out there. We're going to go back and work on our communications plan, and that will involve, we're hoping, some sort of a web presence that we'll be able to share. We have a local NOAA office on Beach Road. Steve McKagan is there, and we will work with him so that he could work with the community to have them stay involved. We also hope to have the ability for us to do open houses when the ship comes out, which would be an ability for the community to come out and actually see the ship, tour the ship, and learn more about it. And I think that we'll work to incorporate our ability to present the information as it comes out to there. So when we get that information about our online presence, we'll be able to share that. People can track before the mission, but while we're out here, we hope to have a lot more interaction with the community during the mission.
Well, it's nice to see you've put a lot of thought into how the community can be engaged in what you're doing, and it's not just you coming in and doing your thing and mapping, but also engaging the local community. So thank you for that.
of course, I mean, I think we try to learn from experience. As scientists, we really quest to seek the information. Sometimes we forget, and we're so driven to go in. So I think we're trying to do better over time, and we've gotten a lot of great feedback from the community to say, hey, we're really excited about this as well, but we'd like to know more, and we benefit from that as well. So we appreciate the community support.
Our guests today have been Evan Howell, Deputy Director, and Nori Shoji, Director for the Science Operations Division of the Pacific Islands Fishery Service Center under NOAA. Thank you both for your time today.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
This has been your Humanities Half Hour. I'm Catherine Perry.
This program was supported by a We the People grant awarded to the Northern Marianas Humanities Council from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily represent those of the National Endowment for the Humanities or the Northern Marianas Humanities Council.